Good morning. My name is Joel Roberts, and I'm the CEO of Path and Path Ventures. And I want to welcome you to Path and Path Ventures Path Candidate Forum. We, Path, are committed to ending homelessness. And to accomplish this, we're participating in a statewide and local public sector discussions on policy and funding that affects homelessness. That means housing and services, and even racial equity issues. We as PATH made a commitment that we would no longer be silent when policies and public attitude were actually increasing homelessness. So this is a live presentation, this forum, with over 800 staff members and 60 board members. And then later we will premiere this also on YouTube and Facebook with our over 20,000 supporters. So thank you for joining our PATH Candidate Forum. With me is the PATH team that's hosting this forum today. They are Jennifer Hart-Dietz, our Deputy CEO and PATH Executive Director, and Zach Schlegel, who's our Senior Director of Public Policy. Last week, we had State Senator Holly Mitchell, who's running for a seat on the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. And today, we are headed south, to the south of the state, to San Diego. We greatly appreciate State Assemblymember Todd Gloria taking the time to be with us today. We have a long history with him, as Todd was instrumental in helping to bring PATH to San Diego. And as a former two-term council member for the City of San Diego's 3rd Council District, Todd represented downtown and Hillcrest, in North Park, and several other uptown communities if you're familiar with San Diego. He was chosen by his peers to be council president, and then during a citywide crisis, he actually served as interim mayor of San Diego. And after terming out from his council seat, he moved to the State Assembly, where he sits on the Housing and Community Development Committee and has the hard job of keeping his colleagues in line as Majority Whip. Now he has the opportunity to return to local politics as a candidate for the mayor of the city of San Diego. And just to note, we invited the other candidate for mayor, Barbara Bree, on our show, but she was unable to attend today. No longer a sleepy Navy town, San Diego is the 8th largest city in the United States and a critical part of the border region, which is the busiest land border crossing in the world. And I'm thankful for his long-term support of PATH, and I'm eager for all of you to have the chance to connect with him today. I'm going to turn over the next portion of our forum to Zach Schlegel, who will moderate the discussion. Zach?
Thank you, Joel. Good morning, everyone. Really excited to have Assemblymember Gloria with us today. He and I have actually known each other for well over 16 years now, and actually helped get me my first job in politics. So very instrumental in my success over the years. So always nice to see him, and glad that he has this opportunity to run for this important seat, especially as a lifelong San Diegan myself. So also wanted to mention that, it was very clear from the results that we got from our strategic plan that staff really wanted to see more involvement from our elected officials and wanted to have more of a say in advocacy and public policy. So this is our new candidate forum series that obviously will run through the election. And then we're thinking about ways in which to interact with our elected officials and future candidates moving forward. So more details to come on that. We have very engaged staff in San Diego, especially, as you'll see. So we've got a couple of them here that are going to lead off the first round of questions for the Assembly member. I'm going to kick it off with Rebecca Samaha, who's the lead housing specialist for our SSVF. And for those of us like me that are still learning the jargon, is the Supportive Services for Veteran Families. So I'll kick it to Rebecca.
Hey there. Thank you, Assemblymember Todd Gloria, for taking the time to meet with us. My first question was, when it comes to tackling homelessness, what would be your priorities as mayor?
Rebecca, thank you for that question. Thank you, Pat, for this opportunity. And it's great to see Joel and Zach. I appreciate the relationship with Pat, and I'm glad that Zach still talks to me after getting him involved in politics, because I think he's been a great addition to our profession. Rebecca, to answer your question specifically, the priorities I have when it comes to homelessness are really informed by best practices across this country. I think many of you know that there are cities that are being certified by the federal government as having ended chronic homelessness. San Diego is not among those cities, but we should strive to be one. And when I look at those cities, I see common denominators between the strategies that they've used in these different locations, different states, different parts of our country that seemingly could be replicable here. And I would just give you 5 very quickly in terms of your question about priorities. One is it has to be, in all those communities where there's been transformational change, it has been the priority of the chief executive of that community. It is a mayor, it is a county board chairperson that says this is a priority, and people follow that leadership. So you will see very clear prioritization of this issue from my administration. Second is we have to use data and transparency. Information technology is often not sexy. There's not ribbon cuttings for these kinds of things, but a by name registry, shared data sharing, and importantly, accountability for providers, I think, is critical for making sure that we can make the best use of our resources, because it's critical for making the case for future resources if we can show that what we're using is being used effectively. Three more quick things: a clear connection and cooperative relationship with the county. I think you all know the city has a housing commission, the county has a health and human services agency with responsibilities for mental health and behavioral health, substance abuse. The city and county have had a famously toxic relationship. I'm interested in resetting that relationship to collaborate. Two more quick things. Many of you know the homeless in San Diego County, about 2/3 are in the city of San Diego, but 1/3 are in the smaller cities in our community. And the mayor of San Diego needs to work collaboratively with the mayors of the other cities to make sure that we are coordinating and leveraging our respective resources to get more people off the streets. And lastly, and this is sometimes left out, particularly by others who talk about this issue, is we have to have more housing that is affordable to low-income people. It is true that many of our homeless suffer from very acute healthcare needs, but a lot of them are simply just poor. They're seniors on fixed incomes. They're veterans whose benefits don't pay enough to live in San Diego. And many of them are the working poor who live in their cars and live in RVs. And without housing that they can afford, we will never get ahead of this strategy. So those are the 5 priorities I sort of see. And I certainly would welcome PATH's recommendations on what else we could do to get the transformational change that we deserve in San Diego that would add us to the ranks of cities that have successfully addressed our chronic homelessness crisis.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Todd. I also wanted to mention that if other staff members have questions, that they can put them in the chat, and we'll get to them after we end this more formal part of the program. I'm going to next go to Anissa Lopez, who's the lead case manager for the supportive services for veterans families.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my question is, where do you see the city of San Diego in the next 4 years? And then what is the state of homelessness at that time?
Well, so my hope would be 4 years from now that we will have defeated COVID-19 and can go back to some level of normalcy. 4 years, I think, is a reasonable horizon to get the city's finances back to where it was pre-COVID. And as a result, hopefully we will have been able to weather the worst of the storm and start focusing on what we can do that's additive rather than what will have to be for at least a short term, which is limiting cuts to key services and programs. The city was running a deficit before the pandemic. It's going to have a worse one for the next year or two would be my guess. So 4 years out, I would hope to have stabilized the city's finances and be in a much more entrepreneurial phase, if you will, of trying to figure out what more we can do for communities. Anissa, to your specific question about homelessness, I wouldn't represent that we will have ended chronic homelessness by then, but I would hope that we would have the foundations, the underpinnings that really have not just providers and elected officials, but the general public, that we have a sense of what our plan is and how we're going to get to this goal and whatever time horizon we think it's going to be. So that would be a strategic plan, a coordinated notion with the county and other cities, and some real reductions in numbers. Right now, I think one of the main challenges I see is that while San Diego's point in time count reflect a reduction in homelessness in our community, I don't believe there's a single San Diegan that really feels like that's the truth, that they actually think that the problem is worse, it's not getting better. I guess I would hope that in 4 years, again, controlling for the fact that the first 2 of those are going to be really difficult years, that with 4 years' time, a good plan in a general sense that we're heading in the right direction and that we know where we're trying to go, and we're doing it in a very data-driven, best practices approach rather than the current approach, which I think is much more ad hoc, haphazard, and as one of your partners at the Connections Housing Project said, really publicity-driven rather than outcome-driven.
All right, thank you, Anissa, and thank you, Todd. The next question comes from Leslie Whaler, who's the case manager for our Whole Person Wellness Program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Gloria, for showing up today. My question for you is, do you feel like Housing First has been successful in San Diego?
Um, so that's a great question because I do believe in housing first, and that's just this one man's opinion. I would encourage you to look at and you probably have looked at national data that really supports this. And I think when we have used it correctly, it has been successful. I'm thinking about the United Way's Project 25. Um, I would argue in a way the convention center currently is a reflection of that, where we're immediately getting people off the streets, getting them placed, getting them surrounding services, and then transitioning them into more permanent and supportive housing situation. The hesitation, Leslie, that you hear in my answer is that I don't think that we've actually meaningfully committed to this approach. And then in fact, you may know some of the leading voices against housing first are here in San Diego County. And so I feel like every couple of months I get a media call parroting the rhetoric from some of those other providers that are really resistant of this approach. And sadly, actually, in the case of this mayor's race, my opponent has switched from supporting housing first to instead taking a different approach. And so, Leslie, my hope is that we can embrace housing first, not just in word, but in deed, and that this is not implemented just as showcase projects or demonstrations or pilot projects, but that we actually make that kind of the central focus of our homelessness response here in San Diego. I think if we do, I would be able to say definitively yes to your question. I think right now is that we know data suggests that it is very successful. The times when we've implemented faithfully, it has worked. We just need to implement it at scale.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Todd. Next, going to kick it to one of our board members, Syed Ali. I think Todd is very familiar with Syed. Syed actually was the Small Business Person of the Year by the Small Business Administration in 2019. Very excited for him. And then he's also the president and CEO of Interpreters Unlimited. He's been a board member for several years now on the San Diego Advisory Board, and then recently, I think within the last year, actually took my seat on the statewide board. So I'll kick it to Syed.
Well, good morning, all, and good morning, Todd. Good to see you, and I guess you'll probably see you again this afternoon. That's great. Given your experience at the state and local level, what do you see as a solution to the homeless crisis?
Syed, thank you for that question. It's good to see you, my friend, and thank you for your service on the PATH board, as well as the myriad of other ways that you serve our community. You know, I think that my time in Sacramento is going to make me a better mayor in the sense that the homelessness crisis is not contained solely in San Diego. You know, this is a statewide concern. This is a national concern, really, but obviously it's very acute in California. And I think as a mayor, I would want to make sure that every community in California is doing its fair share of helping to resolve this issue. So like what I was just describing to Leslie, you know, if we can create an ecosystem here in San Diego that effectively transitions people from the street into housing, that's fantastic. But my observation is that I don't think the average citizen or resident of California particularly cares which side of the city limits the homeless individual is in. They want that person housed. And so to the extent that the state can be helpful in making sure that every community has similar goals, utilizing similar best practices to accomplish this, and then to provide the incentives to do so. I think one of the things been most proud of my time in the legislature was working with Senator Tony Atkins to help pass Senate Bill 2, which many of you know is a permanent funding source for the construction of low-income housing in California. And when you take those state dollars, marry them with local dollars, that's how you get structures, homes that are built. And I think a lot of you who work in PATH shelters know that, you know, it's great to get them off the streets, but eventually you got to transition them into more supportive housing, a more permanent, stable housing situation. And so the state can play a role in doing that. I'll confess that prior to my election to the legislature, I think I often thought of the state as the devil. What I've come to understand is that the state can be helpful if you can engage with it. And I'm hopeful to come back to San Diego with the knowledge of how the state works, with the relationships with people like Governor Newsom, to make sure that when when the governor needs to hear from San Diego, he'll take the call. And importantly, again, make sure that what we're doing, every community is doing its fair share, that every community is actually tackling this issue with the seriousness that I hope to bring here in San Diego.
All right, thank you, Todd, and thank you, Syed. I was now going to kick it over to Jennifer Hart-Dietz, who's our Executive Director and Deputy Chief Executive Officer, excuse me. Jennifer?
Thanks so much. Thank you all for asking the questions, and thank you, Assemblymember, for joining us today. Before we go into kind of the live Q&A, which it does take a minute for those of you listening for it to come over, so start typing your questions now. We see a couple coming through. I wanted to actually maybe start off with a little discussion around equity. And I know, Joel, we've been kind of talking about this organizationally now for quite a while, and formed our DEI committee, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee over 18 months ago. But it really, disproportionately, individuals from Black and Brown communities are impacted by homelessness. Joel, do you want to join the conversation a little bit, and we can get Assemblymember Gloria's thoughts on how we can address this?
Sure. Todd, you talked about housing first, and those of us who have been in this world of trying to help people get off the streets and into homes, housing first has been just a big priority, and just getting people into homes. And we've been finding out just in the last year or so that it's not just housing first, because we're not getting the right people into homes. And we're finding out that people of color are not getting into homes as quickly as those, the white community. So just wondering how you can kind of see the city of San Diego, and will it shift its perspective on housing first and how to address homelessness, given the fact that there's this whole equity issue that's happening right now?
It's a great question. And, the equity increasingly is what I hear in a lot of policy debates, not just around homelessness, but really everything. When you look at how the pandemic has played out, I haven't seen data in the last number of weeks, but if San Diego's unemployment rate currently is somewhere around 10%, we know that in Black and Brown communities, it's closer to 30%, and that inequity should help drive our decision making when it comes to relief, and where the city, the county concentrate its efforts for employment retraining and food assistance, etc. With regard to it playing out within the context of homelessness, I noted the work that's being done by the LA Task Force for Homelessness, and the really deliberate and specific conversations it's having about what race has meant in the homelessness conversation. And we see it in our own community as well. We just simply haven't had that same conversation here. I would hope to be able to lead a part of that conversation in San Diego, that as we look at this problem, and going back to what I said a moment ago, where people understand the city's making efforts, but they're not seeing the progress that they want. It may be in part because we're not addressing it through an equity lens, right? That you're providing assistance, not necessarily where the need is most concentrated or most acute. I would also say that's a part of those. I feel that inequity is also in display in some of those providers that are really resistant to the housing first strategy. Often looking for kudos for helping to place some of the easier to place clients, when not understanding that a lot of the public is most concerned about the hardest to place clients, right? The folks who have severe mental illness and substance abuse problems that are the huge drivers of public cost, right? In terms of their utilization of our criminal justice system, our public health system, et cetera. And there's a reason why we want to focus our attention on that, because if we can avoid those costs, those savings can be reinvested to actually help more people. That's the kind of equity that I'm thinking about. And again, I would hope that some of those very deep and I think complex and difficult conversations that I've been reading about in Los Angeles needs to happen here too. If we're going to align an ecosystem of homelessness that is really targeted to what is necessary. Last observation on this, Joel, if I can share, and this is a kind of more macro thought I have about public service and where it's going. Government doesn't have specific customers. We serve everybody, right? So, whether you shop at Target, at JCPenney, or Nordstrom, right? There's a different set of clientele, right? We have to pick up everyone's garbage. We have to provide water to everybody. We have to take their sewage, right? And I guess what I'm noticing is a rub between what people's expectations are. When we're making policy, we're making it on behalf of 40 million people, and that often may feel cookie cutter and not able to address individual circumstances. I think that's particularly problematic in homelessness. I think all of you can recognize that pretty much everyone's path to homelessness is different, right? There are different circumstances. And so when making policy and not having it be able to tailor itself to the individual circumstances, that's often where you don't get the results that you're looking for. We're gonna have to find more ways in the 21st century to align people's experiences of government to be more individualistic and more specific to their circumstances. You all are used to, only listening to the music that you want, only streaming the videos that you want to see, right? And government doesn't do that. We're going to have to figure out a way to make that more possible. And I think that's particularly true in homelessness, where a one-size-fits-all is not going to work. We know housing is the necessary need. It's the wraparound services and the supports and the interventions that are different. And we have to get better at making sure our policies allow for that. And we need to find more providers who are able to be that flexible if we want to actually see the kind of change I think the public is expecting with regard to reduction in on-street homelessness.
Thanks. I just want to, Todd, I remember you and I going into the community, 7 years ago, kind of convincing people about connections and PATH. And I know you're real committed to the issue of homelessness. And, for me, I've been running PATH for 24 years. And I thought that we've been doing it correctly. And this year, this whole idea of racial inequity has become kind of an emotional thing, because we're not housing the right people. So my question to you is that you and I have participated on the Regional Task Force for the Homeless, and we have this coordinated entry system that places people in the housing, and we're forced to do that. And even that is not putting the right people in the homes. So what would you do as the mayor to fix that system too?
It's a really specific question. And first of all, thank you for putting the emotion behind it. I think that this is difficult work. What you all do is extremely difficult work. And it's easy for people like me who are policymakers who are a step or two removed to talk about it in somewhat unemotional terms. But I think that a problem as difficult as this one, you have to have a level of heart in this issue. Otherwise it'll drive you crazy, right? I mean, you just, it is the hardest of hard in terms of social policy, and the passion that I bring to this subject, the passion you bring to this subject, Joel, and I think your colleagues here do, is what is necessary to kind of get the change you want. You asked a specific question, and to be honest, Joel, I don't know that I have a specific answer for you right now, but I would like to work with you to try and find one. I understand that the existing inequities doesn't make it hard to place people appropriately and successfully. And I guess that goes back to my just general message that we need more housing of all types, right? At all income levels, at all formats. And that by expanding those options, that you're more likely to get the right fit. I suspect that a lot of times you're faced with placing someone in a less than ideal setting, but that's probably the only placement that you have available at the moment. And that's what we need to work against. And this is, being a pro-housing candidate sometimes is difficult, right? It is often common that neighborhoods don't want to see change. And a part of what you and I did, Joel, was explain to people that placing connections in that community was going to make the neighborhood better, not worse. And I think you've kept that commitment over all these years, and I'm grateful to you. I just recognize that we're going to need a lot more connections. We're going to need a lot more independent living situations, more structured, less structured. You need it all. Otherwise, you're going to continually place people in the wrong places. And that's going to undermine our ability to get success, because it's what feeds that notion that what we're doing is not working, and therefore the public shouldn't spend more money on this. They shouldn't accept more projects in their communities, and that they should just say no to all this. And the kind of response that I hear too often, which is very concerning, which is, just ship them somewhere else. Give them bus passes, send them somewhere else, or more exotic and frankly kind of gross suggestions for what you can do with homeless people. That is not the solution. We have to give them people a sense that this can get done correctly. And I think largely what we're doing is right, but we just don't have the resources, we don't have the beds, we don't have the inventory, and we're still learning a bit too. It's what you said, Joel. You've been in this for over 20 years, and you're still learning. We're still learning too. And my commitment, I guess, to you would be to continue to commit to make sure that we continually innovate, to take in new information and do better each time. And frankly, there's a big difference between connections on 6th and A and some of the other providers that are on other streets. who were created many, many decades ago, and frankly are inhibitors to our ability to replicate a model elsewhere in the community, because people's minds is not, you're so good at what you do, they don't think of your facility, they think of that other facility, and it scares the daylights out of them. What we have to do is give people a sense that this is going to make the neighborhood better. And it goes back to what you're saying, Joel, about having successful placements that get people off the streets permanently.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joel, for that. And thank you, Assemblymember. So we've actually had a lot of great questions coming in. So I'm going to facilitate some of the questions that have come from our audience. So to start, one of the questions that has come up is, I'm going to try to combine two, but we have individuals who are interested in building housing, right? In building affordable housing, yet the permitting process in San Diego is really challenging. So can you tell us, if you're elected mayor, what would you do to really allow folks to build some of this innovative housing that you mentioned?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there are resource questions behind this, but there's also kind of a bureaucracy or culture or approach to this. And Jennifer, I hear what those questioners are asking. I think a lot of folks have interactions with Development Services Department. I don't know a lot of people that would sign up for a second experience with it after they've had their first. And that really stems from, I think, a culture at that department. And quite honestly, I think in the city as a whole, it's kind of a culture of no. And what I mean by that is that it's a situation where folks are not incentivized to make decisions. And so often experiences require a supervisor, a director, a department director to make that decision. And that escalation of that process is more time, and time is money. And that can often spell death for projects that are just hanging on. Like these affordable housing projects are not lucrative affairs, right? And so the delays that come from that could make the difference between a project happening or not. But Jennifer, you said something in terms of innovative, or maybe I think you were saying new ideas. And that culture of no is also one that when it receives or sees something that's different, that they've not seen before, the reflexive position is no. And I would like to convert to a culture of yes. And if you can't say yes, don't say no, say tell me more. Because I think often what is being suggested is just simply new, which does not necessarily make it bad. And so if we need to figure out a way to modify our ordinances to permit granny flats or tiny homes or container conversions, commercial conversions, which I think are going to become very necessary as we lose more businesses because of the recession, and take that real estate and put it back into useful life, it's going to require a city that is a facilitator. No. And I think, how do we do that? Well, I think first off, you have to empower employees. Make them understand that you have a job to do. Maybe give them some performance metrics to measure their work against, and then tell them very specifically, and this would come from me as the mayor, which in our form of government is also the city manager, to say, if you follow the rules, if you follow the law and use common sense, I will have your back. Because I think the general sense at City Hall is that is not the case, and that just one mistake could be the end of your career. And I think any of you who are in San Diego have seen recent headlines of people being terminated for probably some political mistakes, but it's the city staff that gets held accountable. And so it is a disincentive for decision making. It's a disincentive for production. And I'm, again, interested in inverting that and really creating incentives for production. Again, a culture of yes, and a recognition that if a mistake is made, and this is a subjective work, right? Whether or not something fits the code or not is often a subjective decision. That again, if they use common sense and follow the law, their mayor will have their back. And when we make mistakes, we will own those mistakes and explain to the public how we'll fix them. But that is preferable to losing innovative ideas simply because they're different. I don't see things as being different, as being necessarily bad. In fact, I think that that's what we need. I think we need more innovation in the housing space if we're going to produce the amount of housing that we need at the price points that we need to meaningfully address not just the homelessness crisis, but the housing squeeze that probably a lot of folks watching right now experience themselves, where you have a good job, you show up to work every day, but even you are housing insecure. Right? So it's not just about the very lowest of income San Diegans. I'm talking about working in middle-class San Diegans that need that level of innovation, need that willingness to say yes, to actually address their housing insecurity too.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that answer so much. I'm actually going to take it now to the preservation of affordable housing, and particularly SROs and single room occupancies, which we do use and are more affordable for many of the folks we serve. As mayor, what would your take be on trying to preserve this level of housing?
So obviously preservation is cheaper than new construction. It does require a willing partner in terms of who owns the property. I think some of you know in San Diego, we do have an SRO ordinance, which is intended to help preserve these units. And that has been, I think, generally successful, but we certainly have lost more than a few to boutique hotels and other kinds of things where the market incentives we can't necessarily compete with. What I would say is that part of what we need to be doing is building modern SROs. Working with Alpha Square to create new kinds of 21st century SROs. Let's be honest, some of these SROs are not anything any of us would ever want to live in ourselves, right? A shared bathroom, one per floor where you have, multiple residents using that, substandard electrical, asbestos, lead. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I recognize as preferable to the street, but I think few of us can feel good about saying that this is what we accept in San Diego. So, let us make sure that the SRO ordinance continues to do its job, which is to make sure that these units that are often occupied by the most vulnerable in our community continue to exist in our community. And then where possible that we can acquire them, like we did with the Churchill Hotel when I was on the city council, and make sure that we upgrade it and make it decent housing, not just affordable, but also safe and decent. But then really, going back to the previous question, Jennifer, how do we actually permit SROs in San Diego in 2020? Right? What does that look like? And how do we incentivize that? And I think some of what the city has done in terms of parking minimums, minimum unit sizes, moving to floor area ratio, and other kinds of metrics actually are helping to do that. But we really have to have a mayor that's going to demand that get done, right? To say, listen, you are really good at building luxury housing, but that is oversubscribed. Let's find some ways to build some more housing, again, at the low income level, but also in that middle income level. Some of the developers I'm talking to who have proposals who are maybe more closely aligned with what we're describing is encouraging to me, because again, that is, after a shelter bed, that's the next rung on the housing ladder, right? And it just, once you can get people on it, I truly believe in the resiliency of human beings to be able to continue to climb up it. It's my personal observation is there's not enough rungs in that ladder currently, and particularly rungs like the SRO one, which is basically non-existent because we haven't built any in 100 years.
Yeah, thank you for that, and for the idea that we need all aspects of housing to be part of the solution, and agree with the quality of housing needing to be at the forefront. So I'm going to turn away a little bit from housing and look more at services, and we have quite a few questions that have come in around the services. One is specifically around a service center, which used to be called the Housing Navigation Center. And as you know, the contract between the city and the current operator is coming to an end. PATH has been asked to be part of the new program design as this rebranded Homeless Resource Center, with the San Diego Housing Commission as the site operator. And we'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this project.
Sure. So there's an article in today's Voice San Diego that sort of addresses this and out of the situation, because it really makes me angry. But we need to be forward looking, not backward looking. It's my belief that the mayor and council are going to make a decision about this before the new mayor and council arrives. And so my answer directly to you, Jennifer, is that we'll honor whatever agreement and contract they execute under their authority, as it leads up to December the 10th. I have a lot of confidence in the Housing Commission. I'm a little biased. You may know I was on the Housing Commission for many years, a long, long time ago. And I think that what they've been able to do via Housing First San Diego, an initiative that started when I was the city council president, does show that the commission knows what it's doing. And so with a lot of respect to the previous operator of that facility, I think they made their best attempt. I'm not sure they were set up for success. I think that there's a potential that this can work better. But going back perhaps to the first question that I was asked, this has to fit into a context of a community and a mayor that's committed to ending chronic homelessness. And if I see this as being helpful in that cause, we'll continue it and maybe provide more resources. What we need to see is the results, right? And I think that the criticism has been that, this was a rushed deal, that it wasn't resourced correctly, that it wasn't supported correctly. And as a consequence, to no one's surprise, it didn't house nearly as many people as people expected. And after a year is not successful. Do I believe that that's the necessary state for that piece of real estate? No, I think you could probably find a way to be successful on that site. And hopefully this new arrangement will be that. If it's not, we'll figure out some better use for that site. But I do have confidence in the Housing Commission, and I had heard that PATH may be partnering, and I definitely have confidence in the work that you all do. I just think that probably the missing piece in this was whether or not there was a real commitment from the city. And I recognize that the previous contractor, did not get the funding that they were promised. I think had to execute this during a pandemic, which is no small task, where the city's priorities really shifted to, the convention center in a different model that, at the end of the day, though, let me just say, we won't be buying properties without appraisals. We're not going to be buying them from politically connected donors. We're going to do what's in the best interest of actually getting people off the streets.
Thank you so much. So continue on the service idea. We have a couple of questions around mental health services. And we know that the current mental health system in San Diego is largely impacted and suffers from inadequate staffing, funding, training. How will you use your influence, if elected mayor, to ensure that low-income San Diego residents can easily access high-quality mental health care? And if you can, if there's certain actions you've thought about, if you could be specific about those.
Jennifer, I noticed the word influence, which is what this is going to take, because mental health, the city doesn't have a necessarily direct role in mental health, but I'm not washing my hands of it. Influence, I like the word bully pulpit, or words bully pulpit, to describe my approach to this. And mental health has been a passion issue for me throughout my career. I grew up, my aunt is severely schizophrenic. And so, in a culture and in a society where we stigmatize mental illness and don't like to talk about it, that just isn't how I was brought up. Every Sunday family dinner, it was right there. And so I guess I have a comfort level with this that maybe not everyone does. And so as a consequence, I feel a responsibility to speak out about it. And so using the bully pulpit of the mayor's office, and make no mistake, this is the biggest bully pulpit in our region, and using it to address the stigma and the needs around mental health is pretty important. We have an interesting opportunity in this election, not just to elect a new mayor and a new city council majority, which is going to happen, but there's also the potential of electing a new majority of the county board of supervisors who do have the more direct responsibilities for mental health. And so I'm currently campaigning hard to make sure that we do get that new majority so that we have partners in alignment and sort of resetting the relationship that we've had between the city and the county for a long time. And then the next thing I would say, and I've done some of this work in the legislature, I think the lack of resources stems in part because counties like San Diego have not used their Mental Health Services Act dollars. Some of you may know there was a 2017 state audit that showed that roughly $3 billion of this money was sitting unspent in county coffers across the state of California. In our county, that number was about 180 million. So using the bully pulpit to say, you must spend this money. People are hurting. There's a mental health crisis. There was one before COVID. There's going to be a worse one afterward. And if we don't have a county that is committed to addressing mental illness, either because they don't see it as a priority or because they buy into the stigma that says we can't talk about it, we're going to need someone to pound the desk to say we need something different. And I think I can do it from a place not just of authenticity in terms of my personal experience, but from a place of authority, not because I'm the mayor, but because I'm the mayor that's going to say, I will make my housing commission be a true and full partner with you so that you can we'll give you the housing, you give us the services, and this is how you get people off the streets. And Jennifer, I just want to acknowledge, I think a part of your question, or part of that question, was about people who are not address mental health concerns before they become a crisis. You actually can prevent homelessness, right? And I think, again, that's why the full utilization of that MHSA money is really important to making sure that we can prevent the worst of what I think will be a tsunami of mental health problems post-COVID, when we have a vaccine, but we're still dealing with the after effects of the depression, anxiety, and other stresses that come from this disease or this virus.
I know we're peppering you here with questions, and but I think you did a perfect segue into this next question, actually, which is about the pandemic and its impact on the most vulnerable residents. You shared a little bit about what you anticipate seeing even once we have a vaccine. Can you share a little bit about how you would approach addressing this in San Diego?
Absolutely. And this is where I would encourage you all to go to my website, which is toddgloria.com. And we have a link on the main page to what I call Back to Work SD. And that's really, Jennifer, my comprehensive answer to that question. It's back in March when this was happening, it was evident that this was not only going to be a public health crisis, but this was going to be an economic crisis. And that I think San Diegans deserve to know what their mayor might do if given the opportunity to lead the city. So this is, I think, reflective of my leadership style. In March, we pulled together 30 community leaders from the public and private sector, big and small businesses, military, public health, binational partners to really talk comprehensively about what does a recovery look like. And housing, of course, is a big part of this, and homelessness generally is also a piece of this. But I'll give you a couple other things that I think, actually, I've already talked about, in terms of reforming DSD to be more customer service oriented, I think would be transformational for a local stimulus effort. The most common way most businesses interact with City Hall is through development services, through the soliciting of permits. And a culture of no could be the difference between a business staying in business or going out of business. A culture of no could be the difference between a business employing 5 people or 10 people. And so that's a part of what's in the Back to Work SD plan. Another idea that I think makes a lot of sense is a buy local initiative. Some of you know that, well, actually, Path's an example of this. The city spends hundreds of millions of dollars annually on contracts and services. And to the extent possible that we can focus that money locally, spending those contracts with local businesses that will hire local San Diegans who will take their payroll paychecks and spend them in our community is a form of local economic stimulus. So in a world where I know our city's budget is going to be hurting, we know the state's budget is going to be hurting, I'm hopeful that we'll get some additional federal relief, but the last 24 hours is showing that's going to be unlikely, at least in the short and midterm. It's going to be on us to figure it out for ourselves. And that Back to Work SD plan is sort of my comprehensive sort of, here's what I think we can do. And I think there's some good ideas in there, again, like, the cultural shift that we need at the city, buy a local campaign, and other ideas that I think are really important for getting the city's economy back on track.
Great, thank you for that. I think all of us are interested in, what's going to happen next. I don't think any of us anticipated COVID being this long, but it has become, as we call, the new normal. So we have also had a couple questions come in, and I know it's been a hot topic for the last few months around kind of the police and interaction with individuals experiencing homelessness, and particularly homeless individuals who are also people of color. So one of the questions is actually in particular about the point in time count, which is also controversial, but in the point in time count in San Diego last year, there was a reduction. However, there was a lot of, rumors and information kind of around that the reason for that reduction was because there had been recent police sweeps to kind of clear certain areas just days before the count. So what do you kind of think about that, and how would you address that as mayor?
So I've been doing the point in time count for a really long time. Definitely double digits. Anyway, I had that same observation, and the optimist in me wants to say that isn't what happened. But when walking this past year, I got basically the gas lamp quarter to enumerate, and there just were so few people. And again, that's not my day-to-day experience being a resident of the city. I work downtown, I live in Mission Hills, I'm near the Midway community, and I just see a lot of folks. So when the numbers came out with the reduction, acknowledging that the rest of the state had not seen other reductions, knowing that a lot of our strategies are not rooted in best practices, made me definitely suspicious. And that's my personal take on it. But Jennifer, if I can say, I spent a lot of time with San Diegans talking about homelessness. None of them agree with that number. None of them believe that it's true. And so to what I would do about it, well, first off, you can count on me not to direct city staff to round up people in order to try and get a better number. I understand why that may have political dividends, just to be able to tout a number. But that may make you feel good. It might make a good one Newsday story. But if your residents think you're full of it, that is a very, very short-term gamble for long-term losses. So, we'll play it straight. We'll be really direct. And, I just want to also sort of to the beginning part of that question, Jennifer, the criminalization of our homeless is a problem. And, we've done that in part, sometimes purposefully, but also through neglect, because law enforcement is usually the only ones who come 24/7, 365. And I think this opportunity that's been presented to us, I hate to say the word opportunity because obviously it comes at a great cost in terms of Black and brown, but particularly Black men's lives. It does create a space for us to say, well, how do we want to do this differently? And I think this is one of the areas in what is a very controversial issue of some consensus. I see people marching in the streets that aren't comfortable with having law enforcement be our first responders for homeless and for mentally ill people. When I talk to law enforcement, they feel the same way. So if there's this level of agreement, this seems like a first step that we can make to realign law enforcement to match 21st century expectations rather than doing it the way that we've always done it. So I hope that that's at least an initial answer to that question of what I would hope to do, particularly in this moment we're happening nationally. And I feel an urgency around it. Some of you may know that if I was elected, I'd be the first person of color elected mayor of this city. When I was a boy, my parents sat me down and we had the conversation, so I get this on a personal level. But I also don't want to lose sight of this issue. And I recognize that this issue could be pushed aside because COVID is so all-encompassing, because the economy is so all-encompassing. And that would be a tragedy if the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Stephon Clark, Tamir Rice, so many people's names, too many names to mention, go unanswered. And we deserve that answer, if for no other reason than I don't want us to become the next Minneapolis, Louisville, Sacramento. We shouldn't wait for a crisis to come to our doorstep. We should be proactive in addressing this and building trust with the community so that if and when something like this happens, that people recognize that it for it being an aberration as opposed to a systemic situation that's reflective of our city's culture and our police department's approach to law enforcement.
Thank you for sharing that and for addressing, a very difficult situation kind of head on with this idea of how you would really impact the police department and how they impact our communities. There's a couple things on the ballot, right? The November 3rd ballot. One of the items in San Diego that we've actually supported as an organization is Measure A, the housing bond measure. We'd love to get your thoughts as a candidate around, what you think about this measure and, how it might be beneficial for San Diego.
Sure. Yeah, I'm strongly supportive of Measure A, and I hope that everyone who hears my voice will vote for it. And in terms of why do I feel that way? Well, and this goes back maybe to Syed's question of my learned experience from Sacramento. Coming to the table in Sacramento with some of your own money goes a long way, right? Being a self-help community where we're saying, hey, we have this local funding source that we can marry with your dollars, with your state dollars to go further, to do more, I think will be a compelling argument that would strengthen my hand as I try and use my relationships and experience in Sacramento to get positive change for San Diego, or at least our fair share of the pie, right? And then, since redevelopment was eliminated, not quite 10 years ago or so, we have yet to find a suitable replacement for what was a primary funding source for affordable housing. And this could go a long way to addressing that. So I recognize it's difficult to talk about taxes in a down economy, but my support for this is very much about my personal passion for this issue of housing and homelessness. It's informed by my experience as a state legislator, knowing that localities that have money get more done. But it's also informed by the thousands of conversations I'm having with San Diegans who are fed up with our current situation with regard to homeless and want to see action. They want to see change. They want to see solutions. And this, I believe, is action. I believe this is change. I believe this is a real solution to the problem.
Thank you. So one of the last questions we have, and then we'd love to give you a few minutes to share anything you may not have shared with, the folks on the video. Just as a reminder, this goes out to, over 800 staff and our board members, also our supporters statewide. But I thought one of the questions that came in really aligns kind of with the work and with the work we know you do, because we do know you volunteered with PATH. You connect directly to individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So could you share an interaction that you've had and, how did it move you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So, what I find is now that this is such a friend of mine passed out a peanut butter and jelly sandwich once and then trade off that story for a really long time. And I find it so frustrating. As someone who's served a lot of meals and who've done a lot of point in time counts and who have done this work, there's so many stories to draw upon, Jennifer, but I can tell you the one that stayed with me the most was actually she was a former resident of Connections Housing. And it really illustrated for me the difficulty of the work that you all do and the challenge of this problem. So I was doing the point in time count. This would probably been 5 or 6 years ago. And I contacted a woman who was sleeping on 3rd Avenue, actually not far from City Hall. And she was perfectly pleasant. I always feel awful when we wake these poor people so early in the morning. It just seems a bit rude, but it's what we must do. And I woke her and we started having a conversation. And as you know, this is more than about numeration. This is about getting stories and understanding root causes and asking some, fairly invasive questions. And to make a long story short, what she shared with me is that she was a resident of Connections, but she wasn't living there right now. And I, of course, made some assumptions about maybe why she wasn't living there anymore. And what she explained to me was that she was the victim of a sexual assault. She had been raped. And that for her, being in a room, being in an apartment, was a risk factor in her mind. She was so traumatized by her sexual assault that she saw four walls as being a trap. And I think that makes no sense to a lot of us, right? We know that women who sleep on the streets are extremely vulnerable to sexual assault, but for her, it made sense. And it was sitting there with her and hearing that story and seeing someone that has obviously been so traumatized that they're actually not working in their own best interest, they really illustrate the difficulty of our situation, but actually inspired me to work harder, right? To say that, that is not a reason to say this woman wants to be homeless. She doesn't want to be homeless. She's been so traumatized by her life experience that is where she finds herself. And it's incumbent upon all of us to do the work that's necessary to get her the psychological help, to help her understand that what she's doing is actually leaving her more vulnerable. And so I think that story just illustrates the complexity of the work that many of PATH's workers come across every day, the difficult challenge you have in trying to deal with a lifetime of trauma, and why I'm so grateful for what you do, because it's not easy work. It's just a challenge for what's there. And there's a lot of stories like that I can think upon, but that one was particularly just striking to me about why people may find themselves on the streets and how unfair it is for people to say that someone's choosing that life when recognizing that they're making the best decisions they can make, often recognizing that decision is not based in logic, but is based in violence.
Thank you so much. And before we close, is there anything you'd like to share and then that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, I would maybe share two things very quickly. And one is maybe repetitive, but I think it bears saying. I thank you for what you guys do. It is difficult work. This is the hardest social policy problem that we have by far. And I'm telling you, there's some tough ones out there. Healthcare, tough issue. Poverty, school performance, there are tough issues that are out there. But this one is the hardest. And the fact that you all get up every day, you don't do it expecting to become rich, quite the opposite. You know that you're short of a good lotto ticket, you're not going to get wealthy doing this work. But you do the work and our community is better for it. And I want you to hear from someone who has a job like mine, that it doesn't go unnoticed and that it's appreciated. And I'm very, very grateful. I think the second thing I would just simply say is, a lot of times people are like, why do you do this? Kind of the same thing. Like, you could do so many other things for a living. Why on earth would you choose this life? And if I can share just very quickly, I'm a son of a hotel maid and a gardener. And I grew up here in San Diego. I'm a third generation San Diegan. And I understand how difficult it is to make ends meet in a town like San Diego. And this is probably part of my passion and focus on issues of low income and poor people. My parents raised my brother and I to believe that if you care about something, you're supposed to leave it better than you found it. And that really ended up being a recipe for a career in public service. I love our community. I love the fact that my only responsibility every day is to get up and try and find a way to make San Diego a better place to live. And from where I sit, I think one of the most important and impactful things we can do is to meaningfully address our homelessness crisis. Not just for those who are experiencing homelessness, but for the communities where these folks are sleeping on our streets and in our canyons and our alleyways. I think it is so very important. And I think it is difficult to claim to be America's finest city if you have 8,000 people who do not have a home. We are a wealthy city. We're in a wealthy state. We're in the wealthiest nation on earth. There's no excuse for this. And that's particularly true for those who served our nation in uniform. We can do better. I'm committed to doing better. This will be the priority subject of our we have to get our economy back on track. But this homelessness issue was a problem before the pandemic. It is a problem right now. And because of evictions and mortgage foreclosures and other stuff, it is likely to be a worse problem after the pandemic. And I guess my observation is, if we're dealing with a homelessness crisis in San Diego, maybe it's time to put a homeless advocate in the mayor's office to bring the real change that we've been so desperately wanting for so very long now. I look forward to continuing to develop and deepen our relationship with PATH. And again, so grateful for the work that you do in our community and in communities across California.
Well, thank you once again, Assemblymember, for your insight, for joining us today. We're very grateful for your partnership in trying to end homelessness. I'd also like to thank everyone who asked questions, our staff, our board members, those who typed in. It was wonderful to be able to touch on so many different topics. And I did want to highlight, since you shared toddgloria.com, if you want to hear more about, different aspects of your campaign. So for all of our staff and our board and our supporters, this was our second forum, and we're very grateful to be able to do this. This actually came out of a staff and board and stakeholder survey saying that folks are really interested in kind of our advocacy and in our message and kind of what we stand for as an organization. So once again, thank you, Assemblymember. We're very grateful for having you join us today, and we'll all hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and I'm sure we'll all connect soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.